One narrow stretch of water carries the energy that powers the modern world. The Strait of Hormuz is only a few dozen kilometers wide at its narrowest point, but every day, massive oil tankers pass through this corridor carrying fuel from the Persian Gulf to the global economy. Roughly one-fifth of the world's oil supply normally flows through this single route. Now that lifeline is under threat. As fighting intensifies across the Middle East, the United States is preparing for a new phase of the conflict, not only in the skies above Iran, but on the sea itself. U.S. President Donald Trump has called on countries to send warships to the region to help keep the Strait of Hormuz open. His message was simple: commercial ships must continue to move through the waterway safely, and if necessary, military forces will ensure that happens. The call came only hours after the United States launched a strike on military facilities on Kharg Island, the location from which Iran exports most of its oil. According to the president, those military sites were destroyed. But he also made something clear: oil infrastructure was deliberately avoided, for now. Trump warned that if Iran interferes with ships moving through the strait, American forces could expand their targets. The situation is already escalating across the region. U.S. and Israeli strikes have continued inside Iran. Iran has responded with attacks targeting Gulf states and military positions connected to the United States. At the same time, tensions reached Baghdad after a missile reportedly struck near a helipad inside the compound of the U.S. Embassy. Soon after, American citizens were told to leave Iraq immediately. What is unfolding now is not just another regional clash. It is a confrontation centered on one of the most important economic choke points on Earth. And the question facing the world is simple: can the Strait of Hormuz remain open, or will it become the front line of a much larger war? To understand why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much, you have to understand how the global energy system works. The Persian Gulf holds some of the largest oil reserves on the planet. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates export enormous quantities of crude oil to international markets. But geography creates a bottleneck. Most of those exports must pass through the Strait of Hormuz before reaching the open ocean. This narrow maritime corridor connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the wider global shipping network. Every day, fleets of supertankers pass through the strait carrying energy toward Asia, Europe, and beyond. And it is not just oil. Qatar, one of the world's largest exporters of liquefied natural gas, also depends heavily on the same route. That is why the strait is often described as the most important energy choke point in the world. When instability reaches this area, global markets react almost immediately, and they already have. Oil prices have surged to levels not seen in nearly 4 years. Some Gulf states have been forced to reduce crude production simply because ships cannot move safely through the region. At the center of this system sits Kharg Island. Located about 25 kilometers off the Iranian mainland, the island serves as the primary export terminal for Iranian oil. Tankers dock there to load millions of barrels before heading toward international buyers. The recent U.S. strike targeted military facilities on the island, including air defense systems and other strategic infrastructure. American officials said oil facilities themselves were not struck, but the island's strategic importance remains clear. If its oil export system were fully disabled, the majority of Iran's crude exports could stop almost immediately. At the same time, Iran still possesses tools capable of threatening shipping. Even if its conventional military forces are weaker than those of the United States and Israel, Tehran can rely on drones, naval mines, and short-range missiles. And in a narrow waterway filled with tankers, those tools can be extremely dangerous. Iran's strategy in this conflict reflects a simple reality. In a direct conventional war, the United States and Israel hold overwhelming military advantages. But Iran does not need to defeat its opponents on the battlefield. Instead, it can change the battlefield itself. By targeting shipping routes, regional infrastructure, and energy systems, Iran can create disruption that spreads far beyond the immediate war zone. The Strait of Hormuz is the perfect place to apply that pressure. Even limited attacks can create massive uncertainty. A single drone strike, a naval mine, or a missile fired toward shipping lanes, each one forces insurance costs higher, slows commercial traffic, and sends shockwaves through energy markets. Iran has also warned that if its oil infrastructure is attacked, it could respond by targeting oil and energy facilities connected to the United States and the Middle East. That threat expands the battlefield across the entire region. In response, Washington is moving toward a strategy of collective maritime security. Instead of relying solely on American naval forces, Trump has called on other major economies to contribute. Countries he mentioned include China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom. All of these countries depend heavily on energy shipments that pass through the Strait of Hormuz. If the strait closes, their economies feel the impact immediately. So the idea is to build a multinational naval presence that can escort commercial vessels and deter attacks. But even that approach carries risks. More warships in a confined waterway mean more chances for confrontation, and at the same time, the broader conflict continues to expand. Missiles and drones have been intercepted across the Gulf, fighting has spread across multiple countries, and thousands of people across the region have already been killed since the war began on February 28th. This is no longer a localized conflict. It is a struggle over the control of regional power and the stability of global energy flows. If the Strait of Hormuz becomes fully closed, the consequences would not remain in the Middle East. They would spread across the entire global economy, because this waterway carries around 20% of the world's oil supply. That means disruption here can affect fuel prices on every continent. We are already seeing the early signs. Oil prices have climbed sharply. Production in several Gulf countries has slowed as shipping risks increase. And energy markets are preparing for the possibility of prolonged instability. Inside the United States, rising gasoline prices are already creating political pressure. Critics argue the conflict has escalated faster than expected, and uncertainty over how long the war will last continues to grow. At the same time, diplomatic efforts remain fragile. Attempts by regional allies to start negotiations have not yet produced results. Iran has rejected ceasefire proposals, and Washington has indicated that military operations could continue for as long as necessary. Meanwhile, the war is expanding beyond Iran itself. Fighting involving Hezbollah in Lebanon is running parallel to the larger confrontation. France has proposed a diplomatic plan aimed at reducing tensions in Lebanon, but discussions are still ongoing. All of these developments point toward a dangerous reality. The conflict is no longer about a single strike or a single battlefield. It is about control of trade routes, energy systems, and regional influence. And the Strait of Hormuz sits directly at the center of that struggle, because whoever controls the security of that narrow channel holds leverage over one of the most critical arteries of the global economy, which means the real question now is not simply whether the strait will reopen. The real question is whether the world is entering a new era, where the security of global energy routes depends on military power at sea.